Hey y'all, in this video let's talk about ASP.NET Core middleware. What is it, how does it work, and how it can be useful to you. So middleware is the software that lives in between the request to your server and the actual handler of that request. So basically a controller method or minimal API method that contains the code that manipulates the C# objects representing your request and response. So there are a lot of built-in middleware components. Some are mandatory, like error handling, which you don't care about. They all get handled at some point. Maybe you always wondered how does it work, why the application doesn't stop. And some are optional, like cores, maybe some caching, and there are a lot of community made ones as well. So in this video I just wanted to showcase how the middleware works, why is it useful to know how it works, and what benefits does it give you. And we'll also write one ourselves with some use cases provided for it, but I'm sure that if you understand how it works, you'll definitely think of some that you might need to implement yourself or just find online, or maybe you'll see that it's built in and you just need to use it. So with that, let's get into the video. How does the middleware work in ASP.NET Core? So as you can see, the middleware utilizes the chain of responsibility pattern, and without going too deep into that pattern, you just need to know that each middleware component receives a reference to the next middleware method that should be invoked, and it can do so whenever it chooses to, so it can perform any logic before that or after that. I think that's pretty simple, it's pretty neat. Also, the order here matters a lot, so the order of registration our middlewares is important, and you'll also see how it plays out, because maybe some of the middlewares won't pass the request further and it will fail, so your middleware might not actually be even called if it's too late. And all of them are part of the request pipeline, so the first middleware just basically initializes the error handling, and then it just passes the request to the appropriate controller or method, minimal API method. So to see how it actually works, let's jump into code that will be much simpler. So in the program CS, we have our application builder, we build some services, and then we actually build the application. And on the application itself, we can append the middlewares in the order from first to last. And so as you can see, I already have some, like HTTPS redirection, authentication, and authorization. As you can see, the order is very important here because we first want to authenticate the user that it actually has any kind of grant, and then we can also use the authorization to apply some deeper level checks for the actual claims that it wants to pursue. And then we map our endpoints. So if we want to write the simplest middleware available to us, we just need to use the most generic method, so the use method, and then we can specify the two parameters, so the context and the next method. Let's make that async. Oops. And let's call the next method. So this is the simplest middleware that we can write. It basically accepts the next middleware component to be called, or if there are no any, it will just perform the logic that we actually written down in our controller or our minimal API handler. And we also have the HTTP context exposed to us, so we can receive any headers, we can append any headers, cookies. We also can get services from it, and also receive some information on the actual handler that will be executed. So just to verify that it works, let's put a breakpoint here, and let's call any method that we have here. So let's just get the books. And as you can see, we go into our middleware. So as you can see, any logic that we want to perform before the next method is here, and anything after the method. So whenever we go up the chain, we want to execute any logic in the before, then we call the next one, And once the request is going back with the response, we can also do something based on that as well. But writing your middlewares here is a little bit cumbersome. So what we can do is we can extract it, our delegate here, and also let's remove this and just create a new class, my middleware, and we just need to implement iMiddleware interface. And now let's just make it async, and we can just say await next invoke, and this will be equivalent to the previous middleware that we had, and we also need to use it by calling the use middleware, my middleware, and this will be launched as well. We just need to add the service of my middleware as well, so it knows how to instantiate it. So we just need to register it in our dependency injection container, and whenever we try to get books, as you can see, the breakpoint is met. So now let's go a little bit deeper with it. So let's say we want to implement some kind of API key validation in our headers. So first of all, we can check our request for headers, and we can see if it has the appropriate key. So let's just try get value. Let's just say that our API key will be provided via this header and out var values. This needs to be wrapped in an if statement. So yeah, now we can check if we have an API key provided, and based on that, if we don't have our API key provided, let's just context response write async API key is missing, and do not call the invoke of the next method, just return. So this way, whenever the API key header is missing, we will just write to the response that the API key is missing and return do not proceed further in our middleware. But as you know, we probably don't want to hide behind the API key validation all of our endpoints. We might do it for some, but we don't want to do it for all of them. So what we can do, whenever we have our controllers or our minimal APIs, we can use attributes. So maybe let's just create the attribute for it, require API key attribute, and this will be just a marker for us that we can use. And as you know, we can use that attribute on our controller methods, but it's a little bit more tricky with our minimal APIs. But we can see how they use it. So as you can see, if we go into our allow anonymous method, it's just an extension method for the builder that just appends to the metadata the allow anonymous metadata. So it's just the attribute. So it's a different way of applying the attribute. So basically what we can do is do it ourselves as well. So we can create a static class with just call API key extensions, and we can say that our allow or maybe require API key method will say that for each of our invocation of that, let's just apply to the endpoint builder a new metadata that is of the type attribute require API key. So let's use that here on our books and require API key. So now we can check in our middleware if that particular endpoint that the user is calling and we've hit our middleware on, if it has the appropriate attribute. So now we want to get the endpoint. It basically holds the information of our metadata and the route and similar stuff to that, and get the require API key attribute. It's not null. So now we also need to use conditional access here. So yeah, whenever we have our API key missing and the endpoint has the metadata of required key attribute, we can write to that answer that the API key is missing. For now, we just don't check for the value, but we just check for the header. So let's see if that works. So we execute our method. We can see in our immediate window that when we try to receive the metadata for it, it actually gets something. So we should get the response. So the API key is missing. But if we remove our require API key method invocation on our endpoint, we should proceed just fine. And as you can see, it's null, so it will just go to the next method and return the data. We currently have no data in our database, but that's fine. So yeah, this works just fine. I hope that you can see. So what you can do next, because I don't want to go much to depth into this middleware logic here, you can of course use dependency injection. So if you want to check your database now or your some other way of configuring API keys, you can do that, and then you can check for it and also write if the answer is correct or not, and then invoke the next method as it's applicable or not. If you want to maybe write some kind of middleware for logging the time of each of your requests, you can inject the logger, start the timer, and of course finish the timer here. Of course, this has the minus of the fact if you append some sort of middleware after that, it will actually account for it as well. So in that case, maybe you need to make sure that it's the last middleware in your pipeline. If you want to append anything to your response, like maybe some sort of header, you can of course do that with some new header and some sort of value xtest. I hope that you can see how the middleware logic works, why it's so important in the ASP.NET middleware. It's not for writing your domain logic, but it's for writing infrastructure that is applicable to a whole range of endpoints. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was insightful. Thank you for watching. See you.